Yeah, no. Like, it sounds silent in here, but I definitely hear the air conditioning. Do you hear a high-pitched noise, too?
No.
No? Nothing? Okay. I think I've damaged my ears. I think I've played too much loud music and been to too many loud concerts that I have, like, tinnitus or, like, always...
I mean, it could also be that my ear is damaged, and that's why I don't hear the high-frequency noise.
Yeah, so, like, that's what they say, right? Like, as you age, you stop hearing high-frequency noises?
Yeah.
But I thought that was because... Is that because you just don't hear it anymore? Or is it because your ability to hear high-pitched noises has been damaged by tinnitus? You know what I'm saying?
I thought it's the stereocilia, or whatever they are, that are in the ear.
Yeah, the little hair cells.
Mm-hmm. Isn't there a part of the ear that is like a spiral?
Yeah, the cochlea.
The cochlea. And it gets thinner as it goes upwards.
Yeah.
And then the thinnest part
is the highest frequency sounds.
The highest frequency, and it's the most susceptible to damage, I think.
Okay. Huh.
And so that, I guess, just gets lost with age normally.
Okay. I don't know if this is the same thing, but I thought it was like the hair cells that get damaged. So maybe it's the hair cells in the cochlea?
I don't remember where the hair cells are.
Yeah, I don't know. I just know that I've listened to a lot of loud music. So now whenever I go to concerts, I like put in earplugs and I'm like super conscious about it. Because I don't want to damage my hearing. But my hearing's still, it's still normal, which is weird. It's still like, when I have a hearing test, it's still like within normal limits. I think it's just like, I think it's just aging, to be honest.
Yeah, we're getting old.
I'm noticing it. I used to be able to play sports for like 3 hours and the next day feel nothing. Now I play sports for 3 hours, the next day I'm sore, I need to stretch after I run.
Do you think, but I mean like at your age, that shouldn't really be happening.
But it's worse than when I was 22. That's what, are we recording by the way? Are we on? Okay, cool. Yeah, it's definitely worse than when I was younger. And I don't know, I think my peak probably was like 22, 23. I'm 27 now? 26? Almost 27? Yeah, I don't know. What else have you noticed about your body aging? Anything in particular?
For me, I think I'm in. Oh, so
you're still going up? You haven't plateaued?
I think I haven't reached the peak yet. At least tennis-wise, I feel like I'm more resilient than I've been stamina-wise. I've never been really good with stamina. Like I've never run more than a mile.
Yeah.
The one time I ran a mile, I felt like I couldn't breathe afterwards.
Yeah, I hate that.
But with something that's like sudden start, sudden stop, like tennis, where you get these 10, 15 second rests in between.
Yeah.
I could play for 4 or 5 hours.
Me too, I love it.
Yeah.
As long as you stop for water every hour, as long as I stop like to breathe. Yeah, I prefer sports that do that, the stop and go. American football, ultimate frisbee's like that. Basketball is like that a little bit less, but yeah, it's a lot easier.
I did notice, and I was telling you the other day, apparently I have this form of supraventricular tachycardia.
Oh, I think you mentioned it, yeah.
Yeah, so and it's really interesting because it only happens when I'm practicing tennis serves.
Okay.
So not when I'm playing regular tennis, but just when I'm practicing serves. And it must have something to do with
the stretch.
The stretch, like this sudden burst of energy that happens with the serve, like you stop breathing and you're hitting the ball. And then when you keep doing it repetitively, 20, 30 times in a row, that's what triggered my...
You notice it more?
Yeah.
Huh. That's interesting. Have you ever done like a sprint from stop? Like we used to do like a 40-meter dash when I played football. We would run 40 meters as fast as we could from stopping, from a stopped position, and you do it in whatever, like 5 seconds.
No, I haven't done that.
I wonder if that would trigger it for you. Because I'm wondering, that would be a way to eliminate if it's exertion-related versus stretch-related. Like what if you just had to do like 10 push-ups really, really quick? Versus 10 jumping jacks when you're stretching above your head?
That's a good way to test it.
I mean, if you want to know.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, the tachycardia starts very suddenly, but it stops within 3 or 4 minutes. And it doesn't feel, there's no pain or anything. It's just the discomfort of knowing that the heart shouldn't be going at this rate.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's like a minor discomfort.
Right.
It's not even like...
I mean, I imagine it's anxiety inducing. For me, I would, I'd be like...
I think the first time it happened, because I didn't know what was going on, It just felt really weird, and I wasn't sure if it was ever going to stop or not. But it stopped after 3 minutes. The second time, it also stopped after 3 or 4 minutes.
Yeah.
So the third and fourth times, when it started, I just sat down, and I wasn't really...
Yeah, okay. You weren't panicked. Were you alone when it happened? Maybe we should describe what SVT is.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Okay, sorry.
Supraventricular tachycardia. So the heart is made up of electrical tissue that contracts once it is depolarized. So just like any electrical instrument, it has circuits that go within it, and the electrical flow should flow in a very specific manner. But there are some pathologies which lead to sort of like a short circuit, where in the normal heart, the flow of contraction goes and then gets dissipated, and then there is like a resting period before the next signal comes.
Okay.
But in supraventricular tachycardia, there is sort of like a re-entrant circuit, which causes a loop that circumvents this resting period.
Okay.
So the heart contracts much faster than it should.
Okay. So it's like a short circuit in the normal current pathways of the heart, essentially. And because it's a shorter circuit, it makes the loop smaller, which makes your heart rate faster.
Exactly.
And that's what you're feeling.
Mm-hmm. Huh. And this is in opposition to... so this short circuit is happening above the ventricles.
Okay.
It's happening maybe within the atrioventricular node or somewhere close to there. But there is also ventricular tachycardia. And from what I understand, that one is much more serious.
Okay. Yeah, that's just before flatlining, right?
Yeah.
That's what you see just before. Okay.
In ventricular tachycardia, the short circuit happens within the fibers of the ventricles themselves.
Okay.
Which really shouldn't be involved in any sort of timing of contraction.
Right.
So that's what makes it, I think much worse.
Okay. Huh. Weird. It's not like you have an errant node that's creating signals in your heart. It's just that your heart it's firing itself, right? It's not like you have another SA node or another...
In VTAC?
Yeah. No, in yours. In SVT, you don't have a node that is firing when it shouldn't be. You just have signals that are going up and causing it to refire. Okay.
Yeah.
Huh, interesting. So, sorry, SVT is super or supra?
Supra.
SUPRA.
Yep.
Okay. Is there a supraventricular tachycardia?
Not that I know of.
Okay.
What's the difference between super and supra?
I thought one was above, one was below. Like superlinear versus supralinear. So
supra is below, or?
We should look this up. I don't know.
I know of like superscript versus subscript.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good question.
Yes.
Supra means above. Super means greater, bigger. Has more meanings. So I guess maybe they're interchangeable in some sense.
Yep. I guess we'll come back to talk about how us being in the medical field affects our understanding of like things we're diagnosed with. Have you been diagnosed with anything interesting?
I have latent tuberculosis. This isn't unique at all. Something like 1/3 of the world is infected with tuberculosis. It's essentially isolated in the bottom of my lungs. It was found incidentally. To be honest, I'm not convinced that I actually have it. You know the TB skin test that you have to do? Medical students have to do it. Like nurses have to do it. Every medical worker, everybody who's exposed to like kids and tuberculosis has to do it. Mine was... So I think the rule is that for a layperson who has no connection to the medical field, they are injected with this toxin, and you kind of monitor the body's response to it. And if you have a lesion that is more than 15 millimeters in diameter, then that's considered a positive response to the TB skin test. For some medical personnel, that threshold is reduced to 10 millimeters, because we would expect that those people are more likely to be infected. So if they show any kind of response, we want to like treat them for it. Mm-hmm. For people who work with active TB all the time, that threshold is reduced even more. So for them, it's only 5 millimeters. The skin test is positive. Mine was like 10 or 11 millimeters after 48 hours of being injected with the toxin. So I have it because I'm a medical student, but I don't have latent TB if I'm not a medical student. They did a chest x-ray, and my chest is pretty big, so they had to do like 2 chest x-rays next to it to get my entire lungs. I think I have pretty big lungs. And they found what looks like lesions at the bottom, like little patchy areas at the bottom of my lungs. And they think that it might be latent TB. My options were to take antibiotics for it, right? Mm-hmm. But TB antibiotics are pretty unique. It's not just like penicillin or amoxicillin or Z-Pak or whatever. It's like I think the options are like a 1-month course of med, a 4-month course of med, or a 9-month course. And I don't remember the actual medications. It's been a couple of years.
It's just to go over this for the medical people listening. The mnemonic for the 4 was RIPE, R-I-P-E. So rifampin, isoniazid,
P,
and ethambutol.
Okay.
Pyridoxine, I think.
Okay, yeah.
Or pyridoxamine, something like that.
I don't remember. But each of them has a different like length of time over which you take it. I just never followed up because I ended up asking them, what happens if I don't do it? What's the downside of never treating this? They said next time you have a cold or something, if you have shortness of breath or wheezing or something like that, you want to be wary, and it might be like onset of TB symptoms. So every time I have a cold, if I have really bad, shortness of breath, chest tightness, wheezing, then I'm a little more cautious, but that hasn't really happened. It hasn't affected my exercise. It hasn't affected my life. I can still treat it whenever I want, but...
Have you had the vaccine before for TB?
It's a vaccine? Oh, that vaccine's kind of bullshit, isn't it?
I've heard that it works really well in areas with high levels of TB, but that it might have negative effects in areas which have low incidence, like the Western world.
Yeah. So in the US, we don't routinely give TB vaccine. I have a friend who grew up in India, and I think they do it there.
Yeah, and I also got it.
Okay.
Because I was born in the Middle East.
Okay.
So I always have a positive TB skin test. So for me, I always have to do the
blood test.
The blood test.
So I did the blood test. It was negative.
Oh, I thought...
Blood test is the gold standard. You're not supposed to take the blood test. If you look at the algorithm for how they diagnose TB, once you've had a positive skin test, you're just supposed to assume that you have it. But I did the blood test anyway, and it was negative. Yeah, what is it called? Like immunogold or something?
Quantiferon immuno...
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. The quantiferon test. And that was negative. So
Have you done any other x-rays since that time?
I have not, no. And I don't want to.
I wonder if there was like an isolated...
It could be. It could just be that my lungs are big and they're catching some of my diaphragm or something. You know, it could be.
Yeah.
Could be anything else in the X-ray. The X-ray isn't super specific. So that's the one thing I've been diagnosed with. Since I've been in medical school, I did get a nose job, as I like to say. No, it was a septoplasty. So my septum, which is like the bone and tissue in between your nostrils and the nose, mine was like an accordion. The surgeon that I talked to described it as one of the worst septums that he had seen. It was bent in like 3 places. So they went in and they fixed all that. So that was like a surgery I had, but it wasn't cosmetic. You can still tell I have a pretty big nose.
Was it affecting your breathing?
Yeah.
Oh,
so it was pretty bad. You have nasal cycles. Have you heard of nasal cycles?
Yeah.
Your nose like prefers one nostril over the other. And it kind of regulates this by, you have like erectile tissue in your nose, right? It's like similar to what's in your penis. So your nostril gets smaller because the tissue around it expands and fills with blood. Your brain does this and it switches between them. Not much is known about this because it's not really studied. One reason we think the brain does this is to regulate flow. When we inhale, the nostril that is wider ends up taking air in at a slower rate. The nostril that is smaller, that is thinner, ends up taking air in at a faster rate. And I would notice that when my congested side was smaller, it would be like I had a cold. So I couldn't breathe out of one nostril half the time when that nasal cycle was restricting that one nostril. So it kind of sucked.
Is the nasal cycle daily or is it monthly?
I think it's like a couple hours.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so I would feel it change. I would notice it change. You ever have a cold and you're congested everywhere? So equally you're congested, and then you notice that one nostril kind of opens up and then the other one closes?
Yeah.
That. I had that, but all the time.
Yeah.
So that was my baseline. It was like I always had a cold.
And now it's better?
Yeah, so now I don't have that at all. Now I blow my nose a lot. So I think part of the surgery, one of the side effects of surgery, is that it kind of damages the cilia inside your nose. The cilia is like the little hair beating cells that like kind of push mucus out. You have them all over your lungs, right? It like slowly pumps mucus out of your lungs so that you can produce phlegm or produce boogers.
Yep.
I think those were slightly damaged in the surgery. So I think I blow my nose more than normal, but it could be the result of having a deviated septum for like 25 years of my life. So who knows? Yeah. But it's like this nasal cycles thing is like something that I kept reading about, and there's like no research on it. I'm surprised by like an autonomic function of the body that is like relatively understudied. Like we don't know why the body does that.
I'm trying to think if there's any evolutionary advantage to using one.
One over the other. There was there's one theory that I read. Sorry, I'm kind of going off on a tangent on this, but I was all about this before my surgery because it was like my condition.
Was your surgery before or after medical school?
It was just after. No, it was just before step 1. So it was between.
So at the peak knowledge.
Yeah, exactly.
Peak medical knowledge.
But I was recovering from surgery while studying for step 1. So I had bandages around my nose while doing first aid. But it was fine. It was like well before, so it wasn't like interfering with my work, and I ended up doing fine. So I think it was fine. So when we breathe, we take in. So we have our sense of scent, right? And our sense of scent is essentially molecules that are in the air. If I smell a flower, then there's some aromatic molecule, some compound that's being released from the flower into the air surrounding the flower. If I smell freshly baked bread, you're smelling particles that are coming off of the bread. This is a little gross, but if you go to the bathroom and there's a poop, you're smelling particles of the poop that are going into your nose. The detection rate for those particles varies based on the particle. So one example is sulfuric gas. This is you see it in like sulfuric pools. They're like yellow pools. Eggs have this smell too. That's the yellow in eggs. Sometimes excrement, farts, and poops also have that too. But that's a molecule that you can smell at a very, very low ppm, parts per million. Whereas other molecules you need a lot more of to smell them. And there are evolutionary reasons for that. We want to be able to avoid sulfur before we get too close, before the ppm of sulfur gets too high. So one of the advantages of having nasal cycles is that having 2 nasal cycles allows you to have 2 different flow rates. So you have one quick flow rate, one slow flow rate. The quick flow rate is better for molecules that you detect at a very low ppm. The slow flow rate is better for molecules that you need more of to smell. Does that make sense? If something is flowing through your nasal passages faster...
it gets more time to bind...
the receptor.
If it's going faster, then it has less time to bind the receptor.
Something like that. So the point is that you have like these 2 different channels for 2 different groups of molecules. Things that you smell very well, things that you don't smell very well. Things that you need in high concentrations, things that you need in low concentrations. And you're not going to have 2 functionally separate nasal passages, so your body switches between them. That's one of the theories. There's not much evidence to support this, but it does have a nice, teleological evolutionary basis.
Yeah.
But yeah, that then affects the like binding dynamics, like you said, or the detection dynamics, or everything else that's upstream of that or downstream of that, however you want to think of it.
How has your being a medical student affected these experiences? Like with the diagnosis of latent TB and with this surgery?
Yeah. I think I had some level of like medical anxiety before I went to medical school. Not like anxious, like it would ruin my day anxious, but I think I would be more wary. I would like imagine the worst possible whenever I had like a cold or whenever I had like a sprained ankle or when I broke my foot. I was like, oh shit, am I going to be able to walk on this for the rest of my life? now I have like much more perspective as to what the actual scope of the injury or scope of the disease is. Like when I was diagnosed with latent TB, I was pretty nonchalant about it. I imagine that if I had gotten a diagnosis of tuberculosis when I was in high school, I would have been like, "Oh shit! All these people in the 1800s died of tuberculosis." Like,
yep.
Fuck. Like,
consumption.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and like this big horrible disease that killed half the population before 1800. Now I know the scope of the disease, that TB is like relatively easily treatable in the like Western world, and that we have the medicines for it, and that latent TB is so common and so prevalent that it doesn't really matter, and I probably would have picked it up throughout my medical career anyway. So, it makes me more confident and makes me approach these disorders better. That being said, I haven't had that. These aren't that big of a diagnosis. I imagine if I was told that I have cancer, then I still would have that response, that natural response. So, I prefer approaching my health with the medical knowledge that I have.
Yeah, I agree. It was the same experience for me with the SVT. Like if someone would have told me before medical school, you have supraventricular tachycardia, that sounds like a pretty scary diagnosis. It's
like a lot of Latin words and stuff. Yeah, I agree. Especially if you pair that with the anxiety of your heart beating fast.
Yeah. So you start thinking about, am I going to get a heart attack? Is my heart going to stop working? Am I going to have this for the rest of my life? Is it going to get worse as I age?
Right. Do I need surgery?
Yeah, so interestingly, one of the treatments for SVT is a catheter ablation.
I knew you were going to say that, yeah.
And that is where they insert a catheter through one of your veins and take it back to your heart. And at the tip of the catheter, there's
It's a piece of metal, isn't it?
A piece of metal that gets really, really hot, right?
You pass a current through it.
Yeah, you pass a current, it heats up, and then it sort of kills the tissue around it. And that's the idea with killing the bad tissue that's causing this re-entrant circuit. So the doctor told me that's one option that I have. Yeah. And the other option, just watchful waiting.
Yeah.
And, unless it gets much worse than only happening once every 2 or 3 months when I'm practicing serves exclusively, then I'm probably not going to be doing the catheter ablation.
Yeah. If it doesn't affect your daily life, there's no reason to, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't, or if you know how to deal with it. It's interesting how something so destructive, like literally burning tissue, fixes something that we have.
Yeah.
Right? This is literally burning, you can kind of think of it as like the highway lanes. You're burning highway lane parallel lines into your heart muscle to direct the traffic that is the current. Similar to how a surgeon went in and broke up all the bones inside my nose to fix my breathing. It's like my body was born messed up, and we had to be destructive to some degree to fix it.
Isn't that what all of surgery is about? Destroying to fix?
Counterpoints, oncological surgery, maybe. Or resections.
But you're destroying the cancerous tissue.
Removing it. Appendectomy, you consider that destruction, or do you just consider it removal?
Oh, I see what you mean. I guess for me the end point was when something is destroyed or removed, it no longer functions or exists.
Yeah.
But I see what you're saying.
I guess, you're saying elimination of something. Most surgeries eliminate.
Yeah, except for things like if there's an internal hemorrhage and they go and they just stitch it something like that.
True, yeah.
But and one thing we learned in medical school in ethics is about the concept of doing no harm.
Right.
And they always bring up surgery as an example because when you're cutting into someone, that no matter how you look at it, that act itself is harmful.
It's so contrary to what we would think. Yeah.
And so ethically, should the field of surgery even exist? That's something that the ethicists like to talk about.
I like that argument. Can't you also extend that argument figuratively to any other medical discussion? So for instance, assume you are morbidly obese and I'm your primary care doctor, and I have to break to you the news that you are morbidly obese. I have to say, Mike, this is getting out of hand. your weight, your BMI is in the 50s. This is going to have long-term effects on your heart, on your skeletal structure, on everything. Mm-hmm. Isn't that to some degree doing harm? Isn't breaking the news of something like that, or saying you need to stop smoking, or like your tobacco habits are pretty bad? Isn't that to some degree doing harm?
Psychological
harm, with the end goal of doing good? Just like a C-section is destroying the uterus, destroying the abdominal wall, with the end goal of getting it out. Getting a baby out. It's like short-term harm, long-term good.
Do you think that's the case in every... Do you think it's not possible to do good without some initial harm?
Because sometimes the initial harm is done elsewhere. Like intubating a patient that is having an asthma reaction. Mm-hmm. He ate the peanuts that gave him the anaphylaxis. So intubating him is like just saving his life. You can always think about like damaging his windpipe and...
Yeah, I mean, the act of intubation itself is very...
Violent, yeah.
Violent and uncomfortable. So I could also see that as being, I guess, in some way harmful. It's the restoration of respiratory function that's the helpful part, but that only comes after the harmful part of inserting the tube.
Breaking their teeth or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah, so this do no harm isn't like, maybe it shouldn't be interpreted as do zero harm, but maybe it's like do no net harm. Which doesn't make doctors sound all that great then.
No.
Which field of medicine do you think does the least harm? The least total? If you could sum all the harm. Probably ID. Infectious disease.
But there are side effects to the drugs they would have to give, right?
Yeah, maybe.
And sometimes they give drugs preemptively.
Yeah, true.
When it might not be necessary.
Oh, and then the whole antibiotic resistance thing.
Yeah.
Which medical profession, which specialty is the most noble?
Oh, definitely neurology.
Oh, because you want to be a neurologist?
No, because I want to be a neurologist because it is the most noble.
Okay, go ahead. Why? What do you got? I'm going to prove you wrong eventually. We'll find something. Go ahead. Do you want half this bagel, by the way?
No, thank you very much.
Sure? Okay.
Yeah. Also, I realized that my watch is reflecting...
On my face.
Light.
Yeah. Yeah, we're in a different room today. There's like a sun coming through a massive window, and he's wearing a watch that keeps poking it at my face, but it's okay.
And you might hear some police sirens, but don't worry, we're not in any trouble.
No, we're good. How much time you got, by the way?
15 more minutes.
Okay, yeah. Stop whenever you're to
collect more mouse tissue.
Yeah, no rush.
But yeah, why neurology? I think that every other field in medicine exists for the sole purpose of saving the brain.
Okay.
Like, why do we have cardiology? So that the heart works, so that it gets blood to the brain, so that the brain functions. Why do we have pulmonologists?
Yeah.
Same thing. We want the brain to function.
Yeah.
We don't care about the actual lungs. We'll replace the lungs. We'll replace the heart. We'll replace the kidneys.
The limbs, everything, yeah.
Everything. We could get prosthetics, but the brain we cannot replace.
Okay.
And so I think that if humanity does reach some sort of endpoint where there is no more disease, in the process of going to that endpoint, neurology will be the last field to stop existing.
Neurology kind of combined with neurosurgery then.
Yeah. And psychiatry. I view them all as one big family of fields.
What makes that what is more noble about that? So, okay, if humans have a soul, or like human consciousness is in the brain, yes, agreed. Mm-hmm. Why is it better to rescue that? That doesn't mean that most of the suffering happens in the brain.
Suffering being like biological insults?
Yeah, that's pretty abstract. That, like, just because the brain is where consciousness is doesn't mean that the brain is the most important thing to rescue. I mean, it does mean that the brain is the most important thing to rescue. It doesn't mean that...
I can see your point that in most problems that people have aren't with the brain.
Yeah.
They're with other organs. But my point is that when we look at the end goal of these other organs, it is all to support the brain. So, I mean, I was being facetious when I was saying that neurology is more noble, but But I think from the standpoint of scientific curiosity, once we know everything about the heart, everything about the kidneys, they'll at the end give us some sort of mechanical description of how the body works.
Right.
But the most interesting questions lie with what's going on in the brain. Like what makes us who we are, where do thoughts come from?
Yeah.
What's the difference between an evil person and a psychopath?
Yeah. I love this topic. I've written about this in like so many personal statements. The brain is like the biggest black box of all the organs.
It's the final frontier
right.
of human knowledge.
Yeah. When we begin to transfer our consciousness into computers, if that happens, neurologists will be leading that charge.
Do you think that's going to happen?
Almost certainly, yeah. If we don't kill ourselves first. Last time we talked about the Great Filter, where we might bomb ourselves with atomic bombs and human race. If that doesn't happen, then I think we certainly will.
What do you think it means to transfer consciousness? Like to transfer my thoughts and ideas to a computer, or to actually, for myself to exist in the computer and to feel it?
What's the difference?
Have you seen the movie The Prestige?
Yeah.
It's like when...
Spoilers for The Prestige.
Yeah, sorry, spoiler alert. You should definitely watch that movie, by the way. What's his name? The Wolverine?
Batman.
Hugh Jackman.
Oh, Hugh Jackman.
Hugh Jackman.
No, not Batman. Batman's the other actor. Christian Bale.
Christian Bale.
He's also okay. Hugh Jackman.
Yeah, Hugh Jackman. He clones himself using Tesla's machine. And he devises this method where as soon as he gets cloned, his original body drops into a pool of water and drowns.
Yeah.
And then his new cloned body exists somewhere else.
Right. So every time he clones himself, he goes through the suffering of drowning, is the implication.
He goes through it, yeah. And then I'm saying that the other person who was created is separate from him.
It's not him?
No.
It's a different consciousness.
It's a different consciousness. It has all the memories and maybe thinks in the same way, but I think it exists as a separate entity.
Okay.
So that the original Hugh Jackman will experience the drowning and will no longer experience whatever goes on in that separate entity.
Right.
And I think that would be exactly what would happen with... I mean, that just sounds really logical. Like if you can transfer consciousness to something digital, you can copy it, right? So that the two can exist at the same time.
Right.
So you will have this copy of your consciousness on your laptop, and it might be doing whatever you would be doing.
Right.
But you would still exist outside of it.
As a separate consciousness. And it would have it's like it was just born into the laptop with all your memories?
Yeah.
Is what you're saying?
And, God forbid something happens to you, you yourself will not continue experiencing what's going on in the laptop.
Right. That's where it splits.
Yeah.
Huh. Okay. I agree.
But do you think...
It does logically make sense that, you don't continue to be in there. Another form of integrating your brain with that would be, what if a machine just sustains your current brain?
Oh, so like that would do the job of the heart and the kidneys and... Everything else. And you just have the brain itself.
Right. Or what if you can piece by piece transfer each neuron of your brain into a computer? Because like in what we were saying in the Prestige example where somebody kind of splits their consciousness, one of them dies, one of them continues to exist.
Yep.
That all assumes that the brain is intact and stays together. Mm-hmm. What if we're assuming that you take apart the brain neuron by neuron? What happens then? Or how does that change the situation? Like, we're assuming our consciousness is just one entity. Can you split your consciousness if you split the parts of the brain? We're getting into the weeds here.
Oh, I see what you mean.
Let's replace things little by little. First, we can have bionic arms and bionic legs, right? Mechanical engineers do that. Then you can replace everything except for your skull and your spinal cord and your brain. So like everything neck down is replaced. Then you can replace your skull and you can give blood supply to your brain artificially. You can house it in a tank and you still have consciousness together. Then what? Then you can say, maybe all the autonomic function is run by a computer, but all the upper, higher mammalian parts of the brain are all done organically with the same natural brain that you have. Then you can start removing, maybe the hippocampus is replaced by a machine, then the...
Oh, I see what you mean.
So like which parts of the brain is consciousness actually stored in? It's probably not the brainstem. That's all autonomic. That's what animals have.
I will say that you cannot pinpoint it. So René Descartes, or let's go back a little bit earlier. Aristotle thought that the seat of the soul, and for this example we'll call the soul consciousness, is the heart.
It's the heart.
Because it is, when someone's heart stops beating, we say that they've died.
Right.
So it seemed like a very plausible correlation.
Yep.
And the Latin word for soul is anima, which comes from the same word for animation, which means movement, or the thing that moves. So the correlation could be seen there with the heart being the seat of the soul. And I think a few hundred years after that, it slowly became proven, especially with gladiator medicine, like the doctors who dealt with gladiators who had blows to the head and like parts of the brain chopped off.
Right, yeah.
They saw that injuries to the head and to the brain specifically correlated a lot with deficits in behavior and comprehension. So I think by the time that Galen came around in, I think either the 1st or 2nd century AD, it was pretty established that the brain was the seat of the soul.
Right.
And then anatomists later on tried to pinpoint an exact area of the brain which is the seat of the soul. And René Descartes thought that it was the pineal gland. And the reason he thought that was because most other structures in the brain exist in both hemispheres, whereas the pineal gland is right in the center, and it just exists as one object.
Okay, yeah.
And he thought that the soul must be one. You don't have two souls in one person, and therefore it has to be in the pineal gland. And I think later on, different people said different things. There was some guy from the 1960s, I can't remember his name, who thought that the cingulate cortex was the seat of the soul.
Okay.
I don't think he believed in the soul as a separate entity, but like he was just using the term, similar to how Einstein would use the word God.
Yeah.
Like God doesn't play dice with the universe. Einstein doesn't believe in an actual personal God.
Right.
But I personally don't think that the soul exists in one area of the brain. That consciousness exists in one specific area of the brain. I think that it exists almost separately from the brain and uses the brain as a sort of interface with the physical world.
So you don't think the soul is physical?
Oh no, not at all.
Okay. What happens if you remove the pineal gland? Isn't that like?
What is it used? Is it for?
Is that oxytocin? Oh, I don't want to end this. We have so many things to talk about.
I know.
Because I don't think it's possible for the soul to not be physical. Well, I just don't think there's any evidence for that, but maybe that'll be a discussion for next time.
Yeah.
Okay, so pineal gland, you could survive without a pineal gland, I think, right?
Oh, yeah. I think I've heard of pinealectomies.
Yeah, I think that's possible.
There was some syndrome which specifically required a pinealectomy.
Is that optic nerve? Didn't it get too big and the optic nerve crosses it?
Is that
pineal
pituitary?
or pituitary?
I think that's pituitary.
So that's what I'm thinking. Pituitary is also oxytocin and ADH, I think.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
What does pineal do then? What is the function?
I have to look it up now. I thought it might have had something to do with circadian rhythm, but
maybe actually.
But that could be totally wrong.
But I think this question ultimately comes down to what you define as soul. If soul is human emotion, then maybe it's like hippocampus, amygdala, probably mostly amygdala for emotion. If soul is like spatialization or consciousness or awareness of our surroundings, then maybe it's hippocampus. If soul is the combination of all these things, then maybe it's the limbic system entirely.
Yeah, I don't think that soul can be narrowed down to only one of these things. The whole frontal cortex.
Yeah.
In terms of rational thinking and wherever art and creativity comes from, you'd have to include that.
Yeah, frontal lobe, cerebral cortex things.
Yeah.
That's like lobotomies. What did they do with lobotomies? They just kind of put a probe in through the upper eyelid and just mixed around everything that was in the frontal lobe.
And I still think that these people had souls.
Because they didn't die. They just became robotic. They lost all their personality. They essentially became
That's what happens with
Walking
people with
vegetables.
frontotemporal dementia. Their frontal lobe, you can see on MRI, it looks significantly smaller than that of normal people.
So shriveled and
But we should continue this discussion next time.
Yeah, we should remember this topic actually.
And
'cause there's a
this
lot to say.
this also ties into to what degree are people held accountable? Like if that person with frontotemporal dementia who has this degeneration in his frontal cortex goes and kills someone.
Yeah.
How different is that from someone who, like from just a serial killer who goes and enjoys these things?
But even the person who enjoys these things, why does he enjoy these things?
Yeah. So does evil exist?
Yeah, no, that's a good point. Does free will exist?
Does free will exist? That's what it all comes down to. Yeah.
Things
so
for
I
next
think
time then?
that's where we should start next time.
Cool.